Welcome to the Metaphysics Hour. I'm your host, Rory Colgan. Today we're going to be reviewing, and in many ways not so much reviewing, but promoting the book by Dr. Judy Wood called Where Did the Towers Go? Now, for those of you that do not know, this is a book that describes the Twin Tower disaster, but it doesn't go in so much to the details of who did it and why they did it. Instead, this particular engineer, this particular physicist, examines the actual empirical evidence, that which can be observed and was observed, and therefore showcases how many holes there are in the official narrative. So this is the type of book that you want to read if you're curious about the truth. Now, okay, so it's been 15 years since this building, or those two buildings, were destroyed, for lack of a better word. And you may be asking yourself, yes, that was a terrible disaster, that was a terrible evil deed, but what's the relevance here in 2016? Well, if you're an American, part of that relevance is that the United States of America has been changed for the time being because of that incident. In other words, there was a department created called the Department of Homeland Security. There was federal involvement in the air traffic, therefore creating or at least empowering the Transportation Security Administration or Transportation Security, the TSA, whatever that A stands for, probably administration, but you never know. It empowered the TSA so that we could all have long lines at the airport. And generally speaking, we were motivated or given this excuse to go into different wars that were not necessarily, from my viewpoint, productive in any sense of the word. You only have to look at the term ISIS and recognize that, well, yeah, that guy that Hussein was not the greatest, but he also kept a lot of warring factions from uniting into this caliphate or to this Islamic Muslim extremist group that has a particular take on Islam, very similar to perhaps like the Ku Klux Klan has a similar, interestingly violent and bigoted viewpoint on Christianity. So I guess my point is it's relevant if you're alive in America because many things changed at that point. And there's deeper spiritual ramifications for it as well. If you are familiar with the late, great Jose Aguales, he said that the destruction of the Twin Towers was the end of time and the movement into the fifth dimension, so to speak. And so what does that mean? It means that it's a heaven on earth. That's the end, and therefore these are the seeds of the beginning. For some people, they're very hard to see the seeds of heaven on earth or this fifth dimensional experience, but it's there for those that can see it. And I guess this podcast, this video cast, is really dedicated to those that are interested in the truth as it pertains to this particular situation, because you'll get one narrative from the 9/11 Commission, just as you get one narrative from the Warren Report about the assassination of JFK. And, here it is, 50 years later, I think, with JFK, and still there are documents that they won't release, and there's all sorts of interesting theories and perspectives out there. Now, I wouldn't say that what Dr. Wood did here in this book is a conspiracy theory, because one, I don't really support that word, but two, she is going off of evidence, and it's this type of evidence that is mind-blowing and at the same time educational, and that's why I really recommend this book to you. If you're interested in the truth, if you're interested in seeing the underlying forces at work. Now, she doesn't go into great detail about who pointed the destruction or who masterminded it, And I think that's to her credit. She is a physicist, she's an engineer, and so she is coming from it from that perspective and explaining how the official story is incorrect, just straight out incorrect. So I'm going to read something to you, and this is probably my biggest takeaway, and then I'll read one other part of it that's very short that also explains one of the ways that she proves her original point, or one of the points. And I guess if you want to know what her main point is, you just have to look at the subtitle. And the subtitle is Evidence of Directed Free Energy on 9/11. So, here we go. Let's jump in. The World Trade Center towers did not collapse on 9/11/2001. They were already turned to dust before a gravity-driven collapse was a possibility. It is a time to discuss how this was done. The common use of the word pulverize refers to pounding or crushing a material. Merriam-Webster defines pulverize to reduce as by crushing, grinding to very small particles. The Twin Towers were not crushed or ground up. They were turned to dust in mid-air. They were not vaporized either. Vaporization refers to the conversion of a liquid or a solid to a vapor state by the addition of latent heat. The buildings were not cooked. They were turned to dust in mid-air. This was a new process, and a new process needs a new word to represent it. We will call this dustification, saying that the buildings were dustified. Amazing. The cornerstone of her argument is that the cause of the towers disappearing was not what we were told. Her evidence goes to show that what we were told was a lie. Well-intentioned or not, it's not true. You know, they say, hey, this isn't rocket science. And that's a cliche that we use to help people understand that it's not that hard to comprehend. Well, what we're talking about with this particular situation is essentially rocket science. And so it's a very difficult book to understand on that level. But if you persevere through it and you just read, and if you sit with it and you strive to understand it and really understand the concept she's presenting, you will see that the evidence points to dustification. Not collapse, not destruction, dustification. And so if that main point is different than the standard narrative, then everything else is going to change. You know, it's like going out on a highway and taking a right instead of a left. Well, if you take a right, you're going to go east. If you take a left, you're going to go west. Everything changes on the crux of the official how it was done. And so her evidence shows that they were turned to dust. Let me read a little bit further. The defenders of the official story maintain the Twin Towers were each hit by an aircraft and that the subsequent fires weakened the steel in the upper stories, initiating a gravity-driven collapse. Boom, 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 boom. Pancake collapse, as illustrated in this figure. As we have seen, there are many problems with this hypothesis. The most obvious is the near free fall speed at which the buildings were destroyed. Free fall speed means that there is no friction underneath, and she has a whole chapter dedicated to this idea that a free fall speed means essentially that that which is on top can fall to the bottom without any resistance. It took about 9 seconds for the towers to fall down, and that's free fall speed. She'll go into the details and tell you how, but if it was a pancake, if one level hit one level, which hit another level, which hit another level, causing the pancake effect, there are a lot of things that would be different than what we actually experienced. Number one, it would have taken a lot longer for the buildings to fall. Number two, there would have been a lot more steel. Number three, why were there elements of steel and other elements found at particle levels in the dust that was surrounding ground zero? She goes into that with great detail. So again, I'm highly recommending you read this book so that you can see the truth of the evidence. She doesn't point to Al-Qaeda doing it. She doesn't point to our government doing it. She just simply says this is what actually happened, not a plane flew into it and then it pancaked at a near free fall speed and fell to the ground. One other thing that I find to be extremely helpful is, how do you know that maybe it just pancaked really quickly? And so she addresses this and says that if each tower was constituted of 100,000 tons of steel and had a total weight of 500,000 tons, that means that there's only 20% of steel as the mass. So if all the steel except that in the lower 36 floors were pulverized, then the lower 36 floors would be fairly light. So she goes through all the numbers and showcases that on the Richter scale, which is a scale that measures the intensity of earth moving experiences, typically earthquakes, each tower should have been a 4.0 on the Richter scale. They peak at 2.3 on the Richter scale. So given the amount of material in each of the towers, which is not debated, the Richter scale is showing that most of it did not hit the ground. In fact, a 4.0 on the Richter scale should be the equivalent of a small nuclear explosion, okay? Now, a 2.3 is the equivalent of a quarry blast or a blast in a mine. And that is what was experienced with that dust rollout on 9/11. So this and so much more is in Dr. Wood's book, Where Did the Towers Go? If you are ready for more empirical truth, more empirical evidence, instead of the standard government-approved narrative, I highly recommend this book. She doesn't point fingers at who or why. She simply points the fingers at what. And I think everybody should respect that level of integrity, her ability to stay clear of all that, which is mostly speculation, and focus primarily on what her area of expertise is. So again, Where Did the Towers Go? Evidence of directed free energy technology on 9/11. All right, you folks have a great day. Subscribe and go to my website, innerhealthtoday.com, to check out what's going on. Love you guys.